So tonight I wanted to talk to you about two great products, both made by the same company, the company being Kovai, which is the same company that makes BizTalk 360, hence the name 360 in the title. Who here, first of all, how many people here are familiar with BizTalk? A few people? Okay, not a lot, okay. And is your experience with BizTalk a good one or a bad one? I see a head shaking no. Okay. So BizTalk, yeah, there's always a bit of a love-hate relationship there, right? Because it is actually a fantastic product for on-premises integration. It's probably, in my opinion, the best one out there. Mexia was actually founded on BizTalk. That's what we did when we started about 9 years ago. Eventually, we moved into Azure when that started to become big. But as far as integration products out there, I don't think there's anyone that's more powerful and better value for what it can do. But one of the problems with BizTalk is that not only did it take specialized developers to be able to code in it, because it's a pretty specialized product, but once you deployed it and actually had your applications running, it was also quite difficult to maintain and to look after because there are so many different moving parts, and it doesn't really behave like a lot of other products do, which are more intuitive to look after. So that's where Kovai came in, because they created a product called BizTalk 360, which was designed as a management solution for BizTalk. And it evolved over the years. It started out pretty basic, but they kept growing it, and it's become like the best product in the industry for looking after your BizTalk applications. It makes that job a whole lot easier. So these same guys have obviously also started moving into cloud and understanding that our integration today isn't all on-prem anymore, that we're actually using Microsoft Azure to do hybrid integration and iPaaS. Which we'll talk about in a bit. So they've invented these two great products. One of them is Serverless 360, and the other is Atomic Scope. And tonight I just want to kind of introduce you to those and get you across them. So apparently that's me. When I was in London at Integrate, they had hired an artist to do caricatures and for free, so I sat in and got that done while I was there. There's a few other things about me which you're welcome to look up on LinkedIn. The one thing I would say is that I am a BizTalk 360 product specialist, so that's, I've worked a bit with that company and become familiar with their products and how they work. So we'll start by, I don't think I need to tell anybody here what serverless is. It's been around for a while. It's been quite a buzzword. Obviously, no computer software runs without a server. But the idea is that serverless computing in the cloud means that it abstracts away all of that infrastructure for you, so you don't have to worry about it. All you really want to worry about is your applications, is getting that deployed and having it run. All you care is that it runs efficiently, there's good performance, that it's up all the time, and that you're not paying more than what you should be paying for having that run. And that's what serverless gives you. So basically, you can concentrate just on building the solutions and not on all that infrastructure stuff. And when we talk about integration, which is the focus of this talk, these are the serverless technologies that we have today in Azure which make it possible. So you start with your service bus queues and topics, which gives you that asynchronous messaging model that you want, and publish and subscribe. You have your relays for doing hybrid connectivity. You've got event hubs and event grid for managing event-based programming. Logic Apps gives you fantastic workflow capabilities and also connectivity to like more than 200 kinds of services, including all the big SaaS services and all the major protocols, and even doing hybrid connectivity to your on-prem systems. And of course, API management gives you that facade that you can put over, and your protection and security, policy-based security that you can put over all of that. And they're all absolutely fantastic products. But the thing is, when you're building solutions, it's not, no one of those products is going to really build your entire application. You can't have an entire application built on Service Bus, or even necessarily Logic App. Where these come to force is when you combine them together to actually form your applications. So if you think of Azure as a great big toolbox, it's the toolbox that you use to build these systems. We had a client recently who complained to us because we did a number of projects for them, and in each one we were using a different technology, a different Azure technology, and they were concerned about this sprawl that they were having. And we were trying to convince them that, well, you know, think of Azure as your tool, you know, rather than just, you know, web jobs or logic apps or service bus. It's really all of that stuff combined together. You know, you can't build a house with just a hammer, right? You need the hammer and the saw and the nails and the wood and all that stuff. So that's what Azure gives you. Now, of course, it's great that you can build these fantastic solutions, but the challenge with them, with all that technology spread around, it is kind of difficult to manage and have a view as to what's going on and to track all of that. It's that sort of consolidated bird's eye view of things that becomes a challenge. Now, it's not that Azure doesn't have good monitoring tools. It's got some fantastic capabilities. So you have OMS with log analytics, you've got App Insights, you've got Security Monitor, and the story keeps getting better. But the problem is that they're all kind of diverse tools that do different things. And at the moment, at least as far as I'm aware of, there's no one tool in Azure that gives you that holistic view of everything if you want to track. So, so that is actually where this product comes in. Now, it was until very recently called Service Bus 360, because when the product was designed a couple of years ago, that's what it basically concentrated on. It was kind of another version of Service Bus Explorer. It did a few things that Service Bus Explorer doesn't do, and that was the main thing. And I think it brought logic apps into it. But more recently now, it includes Azure Functions and API apps, and so it's appropriate to actually rebrand it as Serverless, because that's in exactly the space that it's working in. And they're going to keep adding support for more Azure products in it as it goes along. So what does this give you? Basically, it gives you that one consolidated view of your applications that you build in Azure. Now, I say application because an application, as you know, can be made up of many different technologies. So what this gives you the ability to do is that you can group those artifacts as you see fit into a logical grouping called an application. And you can monitor that application as a whole and all the things that make it up, or at least all of the different technologies that Serverless 360 currently supports. And it doesn't matter whether those artifacts are in the same resource group or even in the same location. You can, you have control over what you add to each one of those application spaces. So it gives you the ability to have that view of it. You can not only see what's going on, but you can also perform actions on that as well. So you can actually start and stop things. You can empty queues, or you can send messages to queue. You can resubmit messages, you can schedule activities, and it also comes built in with the ability to monitor as well and generate alerts. So how many here use Service Bus Explorer? Great tool, right? Absolutely phenomenal tool. It's free and it's very powerful. It can do just about everything that you need to do with Service Bus. It exposes almost all the properties. But it doesn't do things like give you alerting, or like you can monitor things or look in things, but it can't actually generate alarms for you, for example, and it doesn't really give you analytic capability. So that's what this product really gives you, and it gives you across more than just Service Bus. It also includes logic apps and functions and APIs. So some of the features: you can monitor your application as a single entity. As I mentioned, you can put all of your artifacts together in a logical grouping so that you can view it that way. And it not only can you set threshold monitoring, so you can say, for example, if my dead letter queue gets over 5 messages deep or something, send me an alert. But you can also do data monitoring, which is where if you expect a certain amount of traffic to be flowing through your application, like say I'm used to getting 50 messages a minute or something like that, if it falls below that, you can actually track that, and you can actually get a view that, and I'll show it to you in the demo, of what the traffic is, because that can indicate a problem that wouldn't necessarily be picked up by a threshold alarm or by an error happening in the system. Also, you have governance and audit capabilities in this product as well. So Azure has role-based access control. We all know that, right? So you can control who has access to resources, but it's that fine-grained control that you have and the view and the one single place to control it that can be a bit of a challenge. So if in this product you can actually create users and give them very specific permissions to view and to action certain things, and I'll show you what that looks like. And not only that, if somebody were to stop a logic gap or something at some point, how would you know who did it? Or even when? You might be able to see when, but you don't know who necessarily was in the portal and did that action. This product has built into it auditing of everything that's performed. So provided you have people use this as the mechanism to control your Azure applications, everything can be recorded. Normally, the way you would use this is it's a SaaS product, so it's hosted for you in the cloud. And that makes sense since you're talking about managing cloud-based resources anyway. Why wouldn't you do that? I guess there are some very specific situations where an organization might want to have more control over that and have it hosted on-prem. So that is an option, apparently, for this. You'd have to work with Kovai to work out how that happens. But normally, the way people would use this is through a web-based SaaS application. So with that, I'll just give you a little bit of a demonstration. So in this, I've created an account. I have a trial plan right now, and there's my account and the details and things that I can manage about that. So on the default page, you have your listing here of your applications. So there's a default application that comes out of the box with it, because you have to have an application to start with this. But I've created my own application called Order Fulfillment, and I've added some artifacts to that. As you can see, I've got one topic, I've got a couple of logic apps, and I've got a function app that's in there as well. So if I've also got one alarm that's configured to it, but you're not confined to that. You can have many different types of alarms and with different settings on it. And if I go and click in Manage on this, I'll get a more detailed view of actually what comprises this. So you can see that we have my topics, we have my logic apps and my functions, and from in here I have the ability to manage all of those things. So from the dashboard I can go into any particular one of those. So for example, if I want to go into my logic apps and see what's in there, I can have them listed. I get some details about them, what their current state is, whether or not I want to watch this or not. So I can flip that and ask and tell it that I want to have it notify me, for example, if there's anything wrong, which I won't do at the moment because I've got an alarm already set for that. I can actually run the trigger on those logic apps from here, and a few other things that I can do. I can disable it if I want to, or if I want to delve down and actually look at the properties for it. That's all exposed. So that information is all readily available. I could do the same with my topics. The topics are actually a little bit more interesting because with a topic you have subscriptions, right? So if I go into operations, I'll be able to see the various subscriptions that I have against those topics and how many messages are currently in there and what the dead letter state is. So in the operations in here, I can even go and peek at some of the messages in it if I want, just like you can in Service Bus Explorer. Have a look at the dead letter situation. If I look at the rules, I can look at the subscription and get details as to what kind of filters, for example, are applied to that. So you can see that this particular one has a filter for a property called customer type that has to be business for the messages to go into there. So that's our services view. Under activities, I can add various activities in here. I've created this one, which is actually to send messages to the service bus. So if I want to do this, I can actually send messages. I'll just show you how I configured that. Basically, what I did is I associated my topic with it, and I have the ability to actually send a message with any text that I put in there, plus setting any properties or keys that I want, and that can basically exercise it. There's a few other properties I can set as well, and I can even schedule it to send messages to, or batches of messages. So you can understand how this can be quite useful if you're trying to test things. So, for right now, I'll just run it once, and it's initiating activity, and it's going to send a message to that queue. And if we give that a moment, when we go back, we should see that the queue will actually, that topic rather, will actually wind up with an extra message on it. Actually, I have to go to the subscription level, don't I, to see that? So we should, yes, so now we have 3 messages in that. I don't know if you remember, but it was 2 before. So that's another thing we can do. In the monitoring, we have the ability to create alarms. So if you've actually used BizTalk 360 before, this is very, very similar to the way that works. It's almost the same model. So what you do is you actually create an alarm. And the alarm basically contains a number of properties, but it's only when you associate it to events that it actually does anything. So you give it a name, you determine whether or not it's a threshold. Now I guess it's not actually letting me change that because I've already associated with something. So we'll say we'll do a new alarm. With the new alarm, I have the choice of a threshold alarm, which means that when I associate it, I'm going to say, like, if something reaches a certain threshold, like if there's, the queue gets to a certain size or something, triggered this alarm. The other type of alarm is just a health alarm, and with the health alarm, that's basically just means that on a regular basis, send me a message and tell me what the state is of everything. So that's the difference between those two. And I might as well create a health alarm for you right now, since I've already got a threshold alarm. So with this one, if we go in there, you can see that I can decide how often I want to run this. Say I want to run this every day at 8 o'clock and maybe at I don't know, maybe at 4 o'clock as well. So I'll get every twice a day. I'm going to get a message that tells me what the state is of whatever it is that I attach to this alarm. Because right now nothing is attached to it. So I can give that. I'll give it a different email address. And I can choose to have it send me an email. I can also set up these notification channels, and there's actually quite a few ones that you can use. But I've set up a Slack channel right now, so again, I'll turn that on as well, and then go ahead and save that. And it's now going to create this alarm, but at the moment there's nothing actually attached to it. So what I have to do is go and attach entities to it that I want to monitor. So when I go add an entity, I can say, well, I want to add a queue or a topic or a relay or whatever kind of artifacts it is that Service Bus 360 monitors at the moment. And I'm going to say, well, let's do logic apps. Okay, so this is going to pull up all the logic apps that I have in the resource groups that I've associated with. So we'll choose that one. That's a good one. And we'll save that. And when it loads it, I then can choose this entity and configure what I want to monitor about it. So for logic apps, really, there's only one thing it kind of monitors right now in the product. I think that it will probably expand later on. But I can enable monitoring of the state of that logic app. So the current state is enabled, the expected state is enabled. So it's whenever that logic app goes into a state that it doesn't match what's expected, it will trigger that alarm, if it's a threshold-based alarm. In this case, it's a health alarm, so it doesn't matter, really. It's just always going to send me an email and tell me what the state is. But if it was a threshold-based alarm that I was it would actually be triggered if the state changed from what's expected. So we can go ahead and keep that, so that's good. If I go back to my alarm, my monitoring dashboard, which is actually where I'll see everything there, I've got my application up here, and I've got my logic app at the moment, and it's green, which means it's healthy because it's the state is what it's expected to be. But since I've already attached an alarm to this, and I'll just show you what that's set to. So I have a state alarm on it, and if I were to now go into that logic app and turn it off, so we're going to disable that, the alarm that I've set up is going to notify me that something's wrong, that state doesn't match what it's expected to be. So it's set to run every minute, so the state has to last for a minute, so it's going to take a little bit. But what we should see is two things happen, is that I will get an email, and there'll be a Slack message that'll show up. So while we're waiting for that to happen, I'm also going to take you to the data monitoring dashboard. Now this is that other kind of monitoring I've mentioned, where if you set up an alarm that's based on, say, a certain amount of traffic that you expect. Say, I expect that I'm going to get 5 messages a minute, or something like that. And if I get less than that, then let me know. Or if I get more than that, I mean, I'll show you how you configure these alarms, but there's quite a bit you can set. And what you get is this schedule here that shows you whether or not you've met it. Now, clearly, all these red X's mean that I didn't actually meet the threshold. If I click on any one of those, it's going to tell me the details about what it is. So this is my orders topic. The actual value, I got 5 successful requests, but I was expecting to get greater than 10. So that's why the alarm is indicating a failure. So you see how powerful this is. It's like, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not negative monitoring. It's I think proactive. Yeah. So this is actually not looking for an error condition that would be considered a system error. It's something abnormal for you in the way you know that your business runs, and you can actually get a view of that from within here. So now I should, at this point, have a message in my mailbox, and let's see where that is. Okay, so that hasn't actually generated the alarm that it should have, but I can show you what it looked like before. So if we look in the Slack channel that I have here, so that you get a notification in here which says a threshold disabled not equal to the state enabled. I'm sorry?
How do you get action stop?
I'll show you that in a moment. And the other thing that you would see too is if you look at my email box here, so you get a threshold violation report. So that's again, that shows it's a little bit. I know this screen resolution isn't really good, but it gives you a very specific list of what's wrong, the actual artifact, and why there's a failure condition. You also get an error, get a message when it goes back to healthy. So when the problem resolves, if I was to resume that logic app, I would also get a second notification that says, okay, it's back, it's fine now. So going back to Serverless 360, I'm glad you asked that. How would you know what's happening? So if we go to the top, up here we have governance and audit, and if we click that, we can see that we actually get a full log of every action that's happened and who's done it. So you can see that the last entry here at 1846, that logic app was changed to disabled, and it was changed by somebody named Dan Toomey. So you can get details. So you can see how you can track all of that now in this, and that's a real value add on there. Yes.
So would you ever configure this to send emails to senders?
Oh, you can send an email to whoever you want. You can configure the alarms to send the email to whoever you want, or use whatever notification channel.
Does it like send? It will send just once every minute?
That's also configurable. So let me go back. Let me go back configuring the alarms again.
Notification just come through.
That looks like that did work actually. Let me just check it. Yes, there it is. 651 disabled. So obviously it took a little while for it to get through, but that's my notification in Slack. Okay, let's move that out of the way. What I wanted to show you was, just got to remember how to get to it. Oh, it's asking that because I haven't. Okay, so monitor, configure alarms. I'll show you with the alarm. This is what I wanted to do, is edit. Okay, so you give it your name. I set it up as a threshold alarm, and if you see, I can choose how many minutes the violation has to persist before I actually generate that alarm, and then I can also set the number of alerts that are sent for that particular alarm. So this way you don't get spammed, right? If something down, you don't want to get an email every minute. I can also set a window of when it's valid. And here I can also configure not only the email, but as I showed you before, the particular channels, notification channels that I want to use for that. In terms of those channels, if I go back to my dashboard,
Does it do escalations like as in the
So you're talking about stepped levels of alarm. I think the way you would handle that is you would actually create 2 alarms, and for the second alarm you configure it to have a longer period of time, where it was, and if it stayed for that, it would trigger that second one. What I was going to show you here was where in settings, the different things that we can choose in here, and one of them is notification channels. So just to show you what's currently supported in the application, if I go create a new channel, we have SMTP. So it already gives you email capabilities, but I think if you would want to set your own SMTP server, for example, you want the email to come from a specific domain. That would be the reason I could think of it. Or maybe if you're running an on-prem version of this product, you might need to do that. You can also set PagerDuty. You can send it to OMS, which is, you know, fantastic, all the capabilities that are in there. And there's also a webhook. So I guess the question is, if there's some other system that you want to import this in, if it supports a webhook, you can probably take advantage of that feature. Start the Logic app? Yeah, absolutely. So just go back home and we'll do manage services, Logic apps, and enable. Now I should probably get an email or a notification eventually that that's started again. Okay, I'm going to go back to my composite applications. Just going to go back to settings to show you something else that's pretty cool about this product. If I go into users, now this is where you can actually create your control about what your users are capable of doing. So I'm the account owner, so basically I'm a super user. I'm God. I can do everything in this. But if I want to create another user, I have the option of choosing a normal user or a super user. So if it's a super user, they can do everything, right? But if I go with a normal user, and I'll just say, yeah, why not? Just say guest. Okay, the email ID, so I'll give that as another valid email address. And when I go into this screen, you can see right away, like I've had a lot of control over the access that they can do. So they can view the composite application group, the default application. I can choose which applications they're actually allowed to view, and then what specific components in that they're allowed to view, and what they can do with it. You know, whether they can create, edit, delete, or just maybe just look at them.
By default, they have everything.
Sorry, by default, yeah, by default it has everything, but you untick what you don't want them to have access. So you can go through in here and change that. And then in addition, you also have the operations, which is managing the entities and being able to actually do things on them, like, you know, purge messages or turn on or turn off Logic apps and that kind of stuff. So it's quite granular, really, that you can control that. Now, try doing that in the Azure portal, right? I'm not saying it's impossible, but how much work would it be to do it there as opposed to just having this one screen, be able to manage it? Now, to be honest, this is only if they access the stuff from Serverless 360, right? If they go into the Azure portal, then it's not controlled or governed from there. So.
Can you grant access here without granting them access in the Azure portal?
Well, really, what's going to happen? I think this is going to be a broker, actually. So really, whatever user you set up in here, the actual action is going to be performed by the account that Serverless 360 is running under. And you give it a service principal. You actually set that up here. So I'll just cancel this. So when I first set this thing up, I had to create a service principal, and I had to give that contributor access to the subscription. Okay. So you also set up you know, your namespaces, your composite applications. You define them in here. I mentioned already about the service principal, and then there's a bunch of different settings that you can control about the dashboard as well. And you can see there's a lot of limits on here because this is a trial plan. So like I can only create, you know, up to 2 Logic apps and stuff like that.
Can you like link to different subscriptions?
Yes. So that's where you would do pretty sure your composite applications is where you would do it. So if I want to create one, see, I've already got two. I can't. But when I created that, it asked me to link to a resource group or resource groups within a subscription. So that's how I.
So you can choose subscription.
You do choose a subscription, yes. So you had to. When I create the service principal, you'll see that this one is associated with a subscription. So if I want different subscriptions, I'd have to create another service principal. So if I said associate service principal, I'd give it all of these details. I'd have to have the subscription ID, the tenant, the client, and all that, and I can set that up in there. And I think I'm limited to 2 with this trial thing right now. So I believe you'd have to have a service principal for each subscription that you want. Okay. Does anybody want to see anything else in here before I get out? Because I'm just looking at the time. That's all.
Notification channels.
Yes.
You got Slack. What else does it support?
Yep. Yeah, it's these. I think I went through it before. So at the moment, these are the ones that are available. So you can set up your own SMTP server if you want to have control over the domain from the email that it's coming from. And Pager, Slack, webhooks, and Operation Management Suite are what you have at the moment. But I would not be surprised to see more added as this goes forward. Yes, sorry, Microsoft Teams, yay. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, sorry, I forgot. Yeah. Teams is in there as well, which is great. But I would be thinking, ServiceNow would probably be a perfect example of something, How much does it cost? That's a good question. And one that I wonder if we will actually get an answer to. Yeah, I'm going to the website right now, actually. Pricing. Woohoo, here we are. Okay. Well, it's not too bad, actually. Okay, so free. You can have a free trial, obviously, for 30 days, but then silver is $25 a month, and gold is $50 a month. And I guess what the difference between those things is just the numbers of applications and artifacts that you can support in there. So it's not very much, but if we're done with the demos right now, anybody else want to see anything in here while I have it loaded? Okay. Great. So I'm going to go back to, you all want to take a picture of that screen because everyone here tonight will have the opportunity to get a gold plan for 2 months using that coupon code. Now the catch is you have to sign up in a week, though, within this week, though, because it expires on the 15th of August. The sign up does. But once you sign up, you get 2 months. So on to the second product that I wanted to talk about tonight, which is Atomic Scope. So there's a link here, and I will put these slides up to that YouTube video, which gives you about a 5-minute overview of the product and what they can do, and a pretty good demonstration. They demonstrate a few more things than what I'm going to be able to do for you tonight, so that's probably worth checking out. But Atomic Scope, basically what this is designed for is to address hybrid solutions and to have an end-to-end capability of tracking in that hybrid solution. So basically this company made BizTalk 360, which was for managing BizTalk. They now have Serverless 360, which can help manage your and look after your Azure. But what about the applications that actually span both? Right? So BizTalk has a great monitoring capability built into itself. It's called BAM, which stands for, who can tell me what BAM stands for? Great, you just won a t-shirt. There you go. Yeah. Business activity monitoring, that's right. I could talk ages about that, as being a BizTalk person, because what business activity monitoring was designed to do was to give you an end-to-end visibility of your integration solutions from a business perspective. It was meant to manage the business processes, and it would be able to answer questions that your CIO or CEO would ask, The problem is that most of the projects that I've been on, BAM has always been an afterthought. And you don't actually build it into your application the way it should be built so that it can answer those questions. but you add it later, and the typical use I've seen for it is for instrumentation. It works very well for that, but that's not really what it was designed for. It was designed really to track business processes, not just technical. A message went through this interface. So BAM was good for BizTalk, and of course in Azure you've got a variety of monitoring solutions in Azure, and now of course you've got Serverless 360, which can bring all that together for you. But what about the end-to-end where your solutions span both? How do you bring both of those things together? So this is what Atomic Scope is meant to address. It's meant to give you that end-to-end business view of what your applications are doing that are hybrid, that span both on-prem and the cloud. So if you look for a typical scenario like this, which is healthcare, you've got a lot of messages flowing back and forth between your integration platform and the other systems, some which may be on-prem and some which may be SaaS systems in the cloud. So if you really wanted to go through the whole patient handling and get an end-to-end view of what's happening, I mean, look at all those interfaces, it would be quite challenging to manage that in a hybrid situation. And here's a more familiar one, maybe a supply chain type of thing, where again, there's many different services or companies that may be involved in this process. If you just want an overall view, which is, where is my shipment? And, how long did it take to actually deliver this product that somebody offered? That could be a difficult question to ask when you're talking about a hybrid solution. So the problem with obviously monitoring end-to-end solutions is that right now the stuff that you get out of the box is diverse. There are different monitoring systems that only look after certain parts of the solution but not the whole thing. So often what we do when we build these applications is that we try to build a custom way of monitoring and looking after them. So at Mexia we did this too. We were actually investing in the creation of a product, I think we called it Flight Recorder. Which would be able to monitor the data both from Azure and from BizTalk. And boy, I can tell you it was painful to do it. It was very, very difficult. And, we're Mexia people, we're integration specialists, right? We know about this stuff. And we could do it, but the amount of time and money that we would spend on doing that, we would never get back from our clients. That investment was just too large in terms of the overall scope of what we did. So this is why a product like this that comes on the market is really useful, because you can plug this in and it gives you that capability out of the box. And it is built by integration experts. It was built by Kovai. They started, Saravana, the CEO of the company, has been a long time, 10-year BizTalk MVP has been out there. So he understands all of this. And of course, you get the same thing that I showed you with Serverless 360, which is the security and the auditing, you get the monitoring, you get the alerting, and you even get analytics with it. So try building all that yourself, out of the box. It would be a rather huge investment. So that's essentially what Atomic Scope gives you. I probably don't need to talk to this slide very much because I think I already have, but basically it gives you all of those features out of the box. How it works, so some of the things that it offers. So it gives you a monitoring for your applications that span both the cloud and on-prem systems. So you can get that end-to-end view of a business process that you define, and that's the key, business process, that may span multiple technologies and multiple mediums. You start by actually configuring a business process. And when you define this, you're not defining it based on artifacts. You're defining the process and the transactions and the milestones that are in that independent. You then attach your technical artifacts to it later. But this is what the mindset that you're starting with, is that you're talking about monitoring a business process, so you need to define what that business process is. And then you configure it to actually track the data and assign your resources to it. And when it's working and functioning, you can actually pull up the entire workflow based on the business processes that you've defined. And actually track all of the information in it. You can actually archive and view the actual messages, and even, as you can see, there's a download button there where you can save them. It supports debatching, which is really important, especially in the EDI world. It's very common that you do a lot of batching in those, and it does support EDI. You have the same sort of control over this that I just showed you with users, where you can give them very specific roles and fine-grained access to particular features in it, and of course full auditing as well. And you have the monitoring and alerting capability in this as well. As you can imagine, there's components that you install on-prem with your system and some that you install in the cloud. For BizTalk, the package includes some custom pipeline components that you put in there and also a .NET SDK that you can program against. You have some logic apps and functions that get deployed and a .NET API, a REST API for that. And then, of course, you get a persistent data store, which probably lives on-prem. It lives in SQL. And you have, of course, a web interface, which gives you your portal where you manage all of that. So the architecture, I don't know how well you can see this screen, but basically in the BizTalk, as I mentioned, you have your pipeline components where you can either put them in send or receive pipelines, depending on what you're tracking. You can also embed them in an orchestration as well. So you can actually, through a workflow, you can actually track particular milestones in that workflow. Everything gets saved to this repository, which is stored in SQL. In the Azure world, you have a couple of logic apps there, and what it actually gives you is not the actual logic apps, but the logic app actions, the connectors. So you embed that like a start process or an update process. I'll show you what that looks like. And you put that into your logic apps, and that's what actually collects and tracks the data for you. So it calls out to Azure Functions, which then puts it in Event Hub, and then you've got something that consumes those events and writes them into your tracking database. And then from the portal, you can just read everything from there. So that's the overall architecture. The Azure components, as I mentioned, you've got some connectors and logic apps, which is really just calling some Azure functions to get deployed and goes to Event Hub. So again, the key word here is business. You can, just like you could do with BAM, with BizTalk, you can use this for instrumentation, if that's what you want to do, but that's really not what it's designed to do. It's designed to actually give you that sort of view of your business processes. So getting started, the first thing you would do is you install Atomic Scope locally on either on your BizTalk server or on a server that has network access to your BizTalk server SQL backend. And when you run it, you know, there's a number of prerequisites that it gives you a screen that checks off to make sure that you can do all of that. One of them that's not on here, and I got caught out for, I'll be talking on the next slide, is that your SQL server has to support full text searching. That feature has to be enabled. Then you activate your license. That's the first thing you have to do. And then you configure your resources, and in this case, it would be your on-prem resource would be a BizTalk group. So you connect up into that. And your Azure resources, you'd be adding one or more resource groups from Azure where your application is contained. And then you create a workspace, and a workspace is basically just a logical container for whatever you're working in. You can kind of organize this however you want. One obvious way may be environments, like your dev, your test, and your prod. You might do it that way, or you may organize it according to certain areas of your business, for example. It's totally up to you how you want to do it. But within that workspace is where you're going to create and define your business processes. And a business process is made up of transactions, and transactions have stages or milestones that are in them that are reached. And each of those milestones or those stages is actually where you're going to collect and track data. So you need to think about how you're going to organize this. You can organize it based on the kind of questions that you want answered from this and when you're monitoring your business. So a couple of things to be aware of that I got caught out when I was doing this the other night. As I said, first of all, the full text search feature, the installer will run. It'll pass the prereqs checks, and then it'll fail with that rather nasty error if you don't have full text search enabled, and then you have to go and hunt for your MSI for SQL and run the whole installation thing to add that feature. So just something to be aware of. Yes, you do need to run run it as administrator. So what they advise you run an admin command prompt and launch the MSI from that. It's a typical way you do that. You will need the account. Will have to be given permission to the BizTalk management database because obviously it needs to be able to query in there. It will create a process in IIS actually, and the account that runs under has to have access to the BizTalk management database. Another interesting thing is that on the screen, and I think I showed it maybe. Yeah, on this screen, I don't know if you can see it, but when you add your BizTalk database, there's a field there for the SQL instance name. So if you're running on like on a dev machine, like I normally don't create a specific instance for BizTalk, I just use the default one. But that box is mandatory, and something has to go in it. Fortunately, if you just enter a dot in there, full stop, it works. So this is something to be aware of. It can catch you out. What else? Yes, when you're deploying your Azure artifacts, they give you a Visual Studio deployment solution. You can also do it through PowerShell. Those are the two ways you can deploy them. If you're doing the Visual Studio, you open up the project, and then you go click deploy, and you get this error that says null value not allowed or something like that. And what it is it hasn't created the solution file. So all you have to do is click Save All, create the solution file, and then everything works. And I found that with the BizTalk stuff that it installs some pipeline components, but it didn't actually add them to your pipeline toolbox for you. I had to do that manually. It's just something to be aware of. There were also a couple of SQL permissions I had to give manually too, so I think the installer maybe still needs a little bit of work. So, in the remaining time that we have, it won't take too long, but I'll just give you a bit of a look at what Atomic Scope is. So, this is, start here on the home screen here. So this is Atomic Scope. This is the portal that's running. It gives you an idea. It's probably starting to look very familiar right now. All these products are pretty much the same. I'm obviously an administrator in here. I'm using a developer license. What's been created is once I've set up the product, and if I just go into setup, I'll go through there. This is a license screen, where I made it active. I then added some resources. So you can see that I've added 2 resource groups in here from Azure, and I've added my BizTalk environment. So this particular VM I'm running has a local version of BizTalk running on it. I then defined my workspaces. So I created one of my own to try to get a couple of things running on my own. But then out of the box, when you install this, you get an SDK with a bunch of samples in it. So I just installed the samples because I think they were giving better demos than what I was able to create in my few hours that I had. So I've got a workspace called Kovai samples, which I've set as the default. There is, again, user management in here, and I think you can imagine that if I go through add user, this is what I was thinking of before. For this product, you now can set up a group if you want. So you can actually make it a domain group, and this product would be domain friendly. I won't go through that right now. And then the application settings, this is just a few things that control how the portal works and how monitoring works. So the first thing that you would have to do to use this product is to define a business process. That's the top level thing. And if I go through that right now and add a business process, so let's say I create something called fulfill, let's use the Australian spelling, fulfill order, or actually it's probably better to call it something like order fulfillment. Okay. And I give it a name, and then I want to go and add a transaction to it. So I give it a transaction name, which maybe say place order, and I set a direction on it. Where is this coming inbound or outbound? You know, from wherever I'm going to track it from. I could do some message type mapping if I wanted to. I'm not entirely sure what goes in there. Actually, I haven't seen an example of it yet. I'll have to find out about that. But once I've defined this particular transaction, I then can add stages to it. So in the stage, I actually define where this is going to be tracked. Is it a BizTalk receive or a send or an orchestration, or is it something that happens in a logic app, or is it something that happens elsewhere like an API app, for example? So remember, there's a .NET SDK that you get with this as well that you can use, and a REST API if you want to actually code your own stuff to track from. And then I can also decide whether it's a debatching stage or not. And then I can add properties to this that I want to track. Now, there's search properties and track properties. So search properties gives you the ability to actually do searching when you're choosing all your data on those particular things, but you're somewhat limited in what you can use in there. There's only for example, these half a dozen or so properties that you can use. Whereas the track properties you can show up, and I think you can still do wildcard searching on those, but they're not handled at the same way. They're not grouped at the same way. It's kind of like hard to describe. From a BizTalk perspective, if you use that, there would be the concept of a promoted property and then normal properties. So probably not helpful to those of you who haven't used BizTalk, but so you have those basic properties that you can choose, and then you can choose whether the source of that's going to come from an XPath into a message or from a BizTalk context property. So context, with BizTalk messages, there's the body of the message, and then there's a set of properties that travel with that as metadata. That's called the context. You can also use JSON XPath if you're dealing with JSONs, or you can just define a constant for this particular thing. So just always set it to this value, because I know for this transaction that's what it should be. You can actually use some regex if you want as well. So you would create that as a search property. The track properties is almost the same, except that here you can define any type. So you're not limited to one of those particular ones. But you can do, again, the same kind of sources and the same kind of handling. So once you create all of these, and we can look at some of the ones that we have already. I'll just discard this. Yes. And we'll look at the business processes that we have. So we've got a process here called Kovai Sales. And if we go in here, we can see that he's got 11 transactions defined in here. And if we look, say, at this messaging only scenario, so this is messaging only, means this is done in BizTalk, and it's not using any orchestration. So it's just using send and receive ports. And what we have, we can see there's one receive port, and we're tracking a property called quantity. And you notice that it's not searchable, so this is a track property instead of a search property. But you can see that that the way it's defined is that there's an XPath to a particular item in that message. And there's one receive. Actually, sorry, that's a send port. This is the receive port here. So the receive port actually tracks a bunch of properties, and these tick marks show that they were created as search properties. So in this case, a message comes in a receive port, and there's 3 different send ports that actually receive that message. And if we want to actually see what that looks like in tracking, we can go to our tracking here and see an example of it. So I think that's a dispatch orchestration messaging only scenario. Let's choose this guy. And if we click in here, you can see that for this particular transaction, it actually draws out for you the flow that it's created. Because when you define this, when you actually put your tracking components into the orchestration or BizTalk or a Logic app or whatever, one of the things you define is you define the stage and you define the previous stage. So that way you can link these things up into a business process. And that way when you pull it up, you can actually click on any one of these, and each one of these stages, as you click on them, it gives you the specifics about it and what it's tracking. And if I can choose another one that has, and hopefully we can 1 to 20, 28 items. There it is, single orchestration. Okay. Okay. So the reason I wanted to show you this one is because this one obviously it has a built-in failure in it. So you can see that the green ones mean that that all went fine, but the red ones show that there was a failure. And if I scroll down here, actually if I looked in the tracked data for that, I can actually look at the exception details and expand that, and I can see that there was a business exception thrown there. Now he hasn't actually put a great lot of detail into that exception, but anything that was actually recorded there for a real exception would show up. So you can see it, and you could also go and see the. I think you can see the message itself. Normally, or maybe it's only here. You can see the message. Archive details, so that view message body, there we go. So I can view the context of the message, or I can view the message body, and I can actually download the content. So if there was a troublesome message in there that didn't work, I could download it, analyze it, and figure out what was wrong with it. Interesting thing about this is that I'm pretty sure this works independently of the tracking settings that you turn on in BizTalk itself. Because in BizTalk, everything that you do, all the artifacts have their own tracking settings where you could choose to save the message bodies or not. Normally in production, we don't like to do that because for 2 reasons. Number one, your database starts to bloat pretty fast when you do that. And the other reason is because of security. Some of these messages could contain sensitive data in it, right? That you don't necessarily want to store where any admin could go in there and look at them. So in here you also have diagnostics. So there's alerts that this can generate. You configure them pretty much the same way that you did in Serverless 360, and then you can have a look at the information that comes out of that. So obviously it didn't like something about the Event Hub configuration I did on my workspace. It worked all right for the samples one. So here we have the alert history that was generated, all the business exceptions that happened. And again, you can go and look and see and find the details of this. And these would be sent out as notification messages if I set up an alert and set up an email. So I would get an email that would look just like this. Right. What else do I need to show you? So basically, this just gives you that sort of end-to-end view of everything. What else can I show you? You have the ability to save out stuff. Hybrid solutions, yes, that's right. So if by hybrid now we mean BizTalk and Logic Apps or Azure Functions or things like that. Yeah. So it's kind of limited a bit still. This is the newest product that they've come out with, and it's going to grow the fastest. So I can tell you that from my history of working with these people with BizTalk 360, they are constantly improving their process. They roll out maybe, for BizTalk 360, they roll out maybe 3 or 4 releases a year that they keep improving and expanding on the product. He's got 2 teams. He's got one in the UK, and he's got a team in India. They're really, really good, and they're very, very receptive to feedback that they get, and they really try to address the customer's concerns. So I've seen the products grow over time. So this one's going to get better and better as we go along.
Does BizTalk itself exist as a product?
Oh yeah, BizTalk. Yes. Sorry, it's BizTalk Server. Yes. It's been around since 2000. So there's been a version almost every 2 years. In 2004, they rewrote the whole thing in .NET, because before I think it was using COM components. Okay. So just given that we're getting close to 8 o'clock, does anybody have any questions or anything they want to see in this? Yes?
Do you have any reviews of the price input?
Let me see. Right. So $300 a month for Silver, $500. And again, it's generally, the difference here between these two is whether you're supporting the standard or the enterprise edition of BizTalk. Just so that you know what the difference is, the standard edition of BizTalk is one BizTalk server in a group. Enterprise actually supports a BizTalk group where you can have a cluster of servers and also unlimited number of applications and a few things like that. Yeah, it seems to be the only difference that they expose on that screen anyway. And if you want if you need to support something more than that, like say you have maybe 50 business processes or something, then they will probably negotiate a price with you. And really, I've only got one more slide. So basically, if you have any questions about either of these products or integration in general, please, you're always welcome to contact us. And also, do check out our blog. We have a very extensive blog of articles and blog posts and white papers that have been written by some very, very smart people in the company. There's 3 MVPs in Mexia, and the other 2, besides myself, aren't as lazy as I am, and they've actually been contributing lots and lots of blog posts lately. There's just all kinds of content up there. Justin Yu and Paco de la Cruz, if you know either of them. And they're really fantastic articles up there. So do have a look and check it out. So thank you very much for sticking out through all of that. And remember that next month we're going to be meeting not on the second Wednesday of the month like we normally do. It'll be like 4th Monday or something. It's the 24th September. So just keep an eye on the meetup site. I think I've already got it posted up on the meetup site. So. Thank you very much.